I have friends in the prosperity. Excellent job, Kyle. Certainly do appreciate that. Good to see each of you again this evening. Glad that you are here with us. Tonight, want to look at the book of Judges. Look at the book of Judges. Certainly a very challenging book, and really we're going to do this more in a kind of a survey type situation, which really means we're only going to be looking at chapters 2 and 3, because really all of the information that we really need to look at is really contained in the second and even the third chapters of this particular volume. What had occurred up to this point, Moses leading the children of Israel through the Red Sea, the people being baptized unto Moses, then went to Mount Sinai, and as God gave Moses the 2 tablets, the 10 commandments, what was his big brother doing there at the foot of the mountain? But asking for gold earrings and rings and such. And out of the fire comes a golden calf. How about that? Of course, Aaron fashioned that golden calf, and God was very displeased. And as a result of their continual rebellion against God, as the spies went into the land and came back with an evil report, they continued to be against God. God then said, you have to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. After they finally wandered in the wilderness, they're ready to go into and take the promised land, the land of Canaan. Joshua leads them into mighty victory after victory. And then, of course, he passes away. And now the land is settled, and we enter into the time of the Judges. And time and again in the book of Judges, in that time there was no king. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. And so we have this idea of how the people lived. Instead of doing things the way that God would have them to do, instead of going to the prophet of God, going and worshiping God in the way that they ought to go and worship Him, instead they did things their own way. And typically what that meant was, in their day, was to have false gods, to either have gods of wood or stone, groves that they would build and worship the false gods of the people that they were supposed to have conquered, driven out, destroyed. And yet they did not do what God would have them to do. And as a result, then there was this cycle. And we're going to look at this particular cycle. Now when Kelly, I think she was about 3 or 4 years old at the time. That girl's done got married. Can you believe that? I'll tell you what. Already old enough to do that. But there was a time when she was that size. And I remember. Yeah, that's right. And then I blinked twice and she done got off and left me. Left her daddy. She's married. What can you say? Well, when she was about 3 or 4 years old, we were reading the scriptures to her. We came to the book of Judges. And don't you know, after about 2 or 3 times of reading the book of Judges, as we got into that, when we would start reading, she would say, and Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. Now, you know, if a 3 or 4-year-old could come up with that, because it happened over and over and over again. And by the way, there were some 15 judges. Othniel, who was, by the way, Caleb's nephew. He was Caleb's nephew. He was the first judge. All the way to Samuel, he was the final or last judge. And so 15 judges in all. that judged the children of Israel over a period of about 300 years. And so over this period of 300 years, this same cycle keeps going over and over and over again. And so we want to look at what this particular cycle was. The first was their condition. They did not fully obey God. Isn't that where it all begins, Genesis chapter 3? Isn't that not where it all begins? We are going to do things my way. Oh, yes, this fruit looks really good. It's going to make me wise. It looks good for food. Oh, I think it's wonderful. And so we're going to do things my way. And sin entered into the world. Well, guess what? The children of Israel, anytime something happened and they were punished, it wasn't just because God was vindictive. God was doing something that he shouldn't be doing. No, you cannot lay the blame at God's feet at all. Notice with me Judges 2, and we'll even go back up to verse 1 and read the first three passages here. And an angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochum and said, I made you go up out of Egypt, and I have brought you unto the land which I swear unto your fathers. In other words, I've kept my promises. Now let's go further. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you. He always kept his promise. Verse 2, and ye shall make no league with the inhabitants of this land. Ye shall throw down their altars, but ye have not obeyed my voice. Why? Why have you done this? Wherefore I also said, I will not drive them out from before you, but they shall be as thorns in your sides, and their gods shall be a snare unto you. Okay, so you think about this. Did God live up to his promises? Did God keep his promises? Every single one. Did the children of Israel live up to their end of the bargain? In other words, God said, I'm going to bless you. You obey my word. You go into the land and you get rid of all of the peoples. Did they do that? No, they did not. So they did not live up to their end of the covenant. And so God said, I'm still going to live up to my end of my promises. That's not going to change. What is going to change is that now you are going to have problems because you did not obey my voice. It's a little bit like Pharaoh. When Moses went to Pharaoh, what did God tell Moses? God told Moses, I am going to harden Pharaoh's heart. Now, did God reach down and harden Pharaoh's heart so that he didn't listen to Moses? No. Whose choice was it? Was it God's or Pharaoh's? It was Pharaoh's choice. In the exact same way then, whose choice was it to have problems in the promised land? Was it God's choice for the people to have problems in the promised land? Or was it the children of Israel's choice to have problems in the promised land? You see? Now, how different are the children of Israel and the Lord's church today? That's what I thought, because that's the right answer. There's not a dime's worth of difference. We act the exact same way. And to say that, oh, this is 2019, almost 2020 now. We're a lot different than them. No, we're no different. We are no different. We are just like them. And yet, are we not glad for God's patience and his long suffering to us on an individual and on an organizational, that is a church national, if you will, kingdom-wide level? Are we not grateful for his long suffering? Because we do not always fully obey his word. Well, why did they not obey God fully? Well, they forgot his teaching. Now, you had Moses, and who did Moses teach? Did he not teach Joshua? He taught Joshua in such a fine way that Joshua was able to, with his good friend Caleb, They led the people into the promised land. They took it. They did everything that they could. And the people did dwell. Now, they didn't drive out every nation, but they did drive out most nations, and they were able to then possess the land. There were just some snares, some thorns in their side, if you will. Go down to verse 10, though. And also all that generation were gathered under their fathers. That is, Joshua's generation and those that were under Joshua. They all died, and there arose another generation after them which knew not the Lord, nor yet the works which he had done for Israel. Now, whose fault was that? Whose fault was that? You could say, well, that was the father's fault for not teaching the children. That's probably partly right. But is it not also the children's part to learn what their parents are teaching them? So who is to blame? Everyone. You cannot put all the blame on the fathers, but neither can you put all the blame on the children either. Then one generation must make sure that the next generation has the right information. So they forgot their teaching. Again, this harkens back to Pharaoh and the one that did not know Joseph and what he did for Egypt and enslaving the people. Now we have a similar situation where you have a new generation of people who are living in the promised land. Maybe they didn't go by the altar that the priest set up there on the banks of the River Jordan. And why are these there? Well, this is because God then created a dry land so the people could come across and conquer this land. They forgot then their teaching. Then you go to verse 11. What did they do? They left God. When you are not taught correctly, you are going to be taught something. You are not going to go through life with no learning whatsoever. So, what's going to happen? Well, if you're not taught correctly, then you're going to be taught incorrectly. If you're not taught right and good and godliness, then you are going to be taught rebellion and wickedness. That's the only two options that you have. So, the children of Israel, then this next generation, they were not taught correctly or fully, and so what entered into their thinking? Wickedness, rebellion. And then what do we have in verse 11? And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. A 4-year-old knows that. And what did they do? Well, when you leave God, you run to something else. What is the very next phrase? And they served Balaam. Folks, when you leave God, you go to where God is not. So you have different situations like light and darkness. What exists? Light. Light exists. Does darkness exist? No, darkness doesn't exist. You say, okay, darkness. No. Darkness is the absence of light. What exists? Heat or cold? Heat exists. Well, it's cold. No, it's not cold. It's the absence of heat. You have right. You have God. And then you have evil and wrong. You say, well, evil and wrong, they exist. Again, either you have the right or you don't have anything at all. Now, we call it evil. We call it wrong, whatever. Either you are with God or you are not with God. Those are your two choices. And so when they forsook God, then the only other place for them to go was against him and for the other gods that were false. And so that was their condition. Was that a wonderful condition? No, that was a pitiful condition. And so you enter into a pitiful condition, and what do you then do? Oh, you're going to cry and complain. Just like good little children do. Mama, I want a cookie. No, you can't have a cookie. But it's 4:30. I want a cookie. No, you have to wait until after you eat dinner, and dinner is at 5 o'clock. You know that. We have dinner every night at 5 o'clock. You're not going to have a cookie at 4:30. Oh, cry, 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 cry. One time, maybe mom says, okay, here's a cookie. Guess what just happened to dinner? And then at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, time for bed, tummy's rumbling. Now I'm hungry. No, you're not getting anything to eat at 8 o'clock, time for bed. Now we're going to bed hungry. Cry, cry. You see, it never ends, does it? Oh, we're not a child anymore. Folks, I've already dealt with that, haven't I? They were sorry to hear what would happen. Go back to verse 4. Go back to verse 4. They leave God, and are they sorry that they left God? No. No, they're not sorry that they left God. They're sorry about the consequences about them leaving God. Notice verse 4 with me. And it came to pass when the angel of the Lord spake these words. In other words, he said that the people were going to be a snare to them. They would always have trouble. We just read that a few minutes ago. And so when God said, hey, these people are going to be a snare to you, you're going to have a lot of problems here. All the children of Israel, that the people lifted up their voice and they wept. Now we call this worldly sorrow. This is worldly sorrow. This is not godly sorrow. They did not repent in sackcloth and ashes. They did not say, God, you're right. We need to now go and exterminate all people. Could they have done that, by the way? Could they at this time say, God, you're right. We didn't do what was right. We're going to amend our ways and cast all people and make everything right. They could have done that, couldn't they? But did they? No, they didn't. And as a result, then, they were always going to have problems with nations like the Philistines, with their other brethren, the Ammonites and Moabites, Edomites, all those. What about the Mesopotamians? They were problem number one, by the way. The other Canaanite peoples that were still left in the land. They were going to have problems with these. They were then sorry, again, about the results. Verse 15. Whithersoever they went out, the hand of the Lord was against them for evil. Not just because, but because they left God, as the Lord had said, and as the Lord had sworn unto them, and they were greatly distressed. In other words, God told them what was going to happen. They did not amend their ways, and when it did happen, then they complained anyway. You and I would have given up on these people a long time ago, wouldn't we? Good thing neither one of us are God. And we're grateful again for His patience. Because guess what? I act just like the children of Israel of old. And if I think, no, I'm different than them, I better watch out. I better watch out. They never left their idolatry. Let's read verse 16 and then 17. Nevertheless, the Lord raised up judges, which He delivered them out of the hand of those that spoiled them. And yet they would not hearken unto their judges. So they cried. God sent a judge to deliver them, to help them out. And yet they didn't listen to the judge. And they went a-whoring after other gods and bowed themselves unto them. They turned quickly out of the way which their fathers walked in, obeying the commandments of the Lord, but they did not so. You know, you think to Gideon, and when the children of Israel then were under that oppression there, and Gideon asked for all the soldiers, and somewhere around 32,000 men came. Wasn't it 32,000, 22,000? Anyway, 32,000, yeah, it was. And then what did God say? No, you have too many, send them away. And again, it was against 125,000 men. So it was already terrible odds. And then Gideon said, if you're afraid, then you leave. 22,000 scared men left. They didn't want any part of it. Think about that. Only 10,000 remained. You see, they were not there because they loved the Lord. They were not there because they wanted to do that which was right. No, they wanted to do what they wanted to do. And they were only there for national preservation. But when they had the opportunity to go back home, let me tell you, they took that opportunity. How sad that is. Good for those 10,000 that stayed though, right? Of course, 9,700 of them ultimately went home. But that's neither here nor there. We're glad for those 10,000. They never left their idolatry. God then, even though they were against him, even though when they cried out, they didn't even listen to their judges, notice that God still gave them comfort. As we read in verse 16, that God would raise up a judge, a man who was at least somewhat faithful, who would do what God would do what God said to do. Even Samson did that which God said to do. Now, he perhaps was not the best individual morally, but when God told him to go somewhere, he went there. When he said do this, he did that. At least he did those things. And by the way, if we were there on those occasions and we compared Samson to the man that was, I don't know, in Ephraim somewhere, don't you think Samson was looking pretty good? I mean, Samson was a holy man compared to most of the children of Israel. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been in the situation against the Philistines as it was. God raised up a judge, and yet they still did not listen to them. That judge then, he would allow them to overtake their oppressor. And when the Lord raised them up judges, then the Lord was with, notice who he says here. He didn't say the people, did he? When the Lord raised up a judge, he was with the judge. You think of Deborah and her judging the people, and there with Barak. The Lord could have been with Barak just as well as Deborah. But Barak was fearful and said, no, I'm not going up except you go with me. God, and because I believe that he knew that God was with Deborah. He wasn't with the people, you see. He was with that judge. And he delivered them out of the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For it repented the Lord because of their groanings, by reason of them that oppressed them and vexed them. And so God still wanted his people to have a good life. He still wanted them to enjoy the promised land. But notice that he did those things because of one person. He caused peace to be over the whole land because of one individual. I find that remarkable. That just about in every generation there's one person who is for the God of heaven. And God will do all kinds of things to help that individual in their life. Maybe you can see God working in your life and how wonderful your life is because you are faithful to him. And then what would the people enjoy? The people would enjoy a period of peace and prosperity for only a generation or two. Now we go to chapter 3, and really we're at the end of the Mesopotamian Othniel, and also then Ehud's. He's a left-handed judge, by the way. That's interesting. I'm not going to read that. You can read that on your own, what happened there. But at the end, here in verse 11 and verse 30, you still have the same result. In verse 11, after Othniel then helps the people under Mesopotamian oppression, and the land had rest for 40 years. And then you skip down to verse 30, and Moab was subdued, that under the hand of Israel, and the land had rest 80. That's 80 years, by the way, that the land had rest, and there was peace and prosperity in the promised land. Why was that the case? Because of that one individual who did what God said to do. And so the people then continued this cycle. They would rebel against God, sin. They would be oppressed, and then they would cry out to God for salvation, and God would save them. And for a time they had peace. And during that time of peace, what would they do? Go right back into the same condition, sinful condition, and it would start all over again. But this wasn't just on an individual level, this was on a national level. Well, was every person in the nation evil? I don't believe that, because God could always find a judge then to rise up to cause the people then to be delivered. No, not every person was evil, but most were. And in the days of the judges, and in those days, there was no king. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. The problem today is there is a king, and people do not recognize his kingship. They say that they do, but their actions speak otherwise. They do things in areas of worship to the king that he does not authorize. There are things that people do in their lives that go against specifically the things that the king says, don't do these things, and yet they do them, and do them wholeheartedly. You see, they're doing that which is right in their own eyes. And when the king returns, he's going to ask, did you follow my will? And he's going to pick up this book right here, and he's going to judge us out of this book, because here are his words. And if we obey them, we do them to the best of our ability, then we'll be approved of him. Yet if we go through this word and we take a penknife, oh, I don't like this particular thing, I'm just going to cut it right on out. You think that's going to work? You know, people have done that. Or maybe they've taken a good Sharpie. People have done this too. And just delete that right on out of there. Just mark right through it. Can you imagine? You think the king's going to be pleased with individuals such as that? No, he's not going to be pleased at all. This is the person he will be pleased with, the one that takes his word, studies it, puts it into their hearts, and then obeys it to the best of his or her ability. Are you here tonight and you need to obey the gospel of Jesus Christ? You need to put him on in baptism. Have you listened to his word? That is, you've studied it. Have you believed what it says about Jesus as being the Son of God? Are you willing to repent of your sins, turning away from sin and turning toward a just and living God? Are you ready to, with your mouth, confess that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and be willing to submit to full immersion in water, contacting the blood of Jesus the Christ? You could do that this very hour. Be then added to that kingdom, that body, so that heaven will be your home. Perhaps you have done that, and yet, like the children of Israel of old, you started doing things that are right in your own eyes again. Don't do that. Do as the king has asked you to do, and come back to him. If you have a need, why don't you come right now while we stand, while we sing.
When we walk